Good evening, welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7 on the 25th of January, which of course is Burns Night, and we'll be coming back to Burns later in the programme. But in the meantime, let me introduce my guest this evening, which is of course Daye Tucker, rural leader. Welcome back to the programme. Daye, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And you?
I'm fine, thank you, Daye. I'm just going to crack on now with the coronavirus update, and then we'll go to the news after that. And as of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,535,986 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,363,033 were confirmed negative. 172,953 were positive. There were 752 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. This, of course, is an underestimate of the number of cases because not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms, and not all of those with symptoms will be tested. There were 4 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. Now, the number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by COVID-19 infections now stands at 5,709. This number only includes those who have died in a hospital, having received a positive test for the virus. Of the people who have tested positive, 2,016 were in hospital last night, 151 of whom were in intensive care. And now to news of vaccinations, and 415,402 people have now received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 4,689 have received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures published today show that 98,531 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 592 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just hospitals. Now, if you'd like to join the conversation here this evening, you can, of course, do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland7. And now to the main stories today. And Gordon Brown has been criticised for rewriting recent history. The SNP has criticised Gordon Brown for shamelessly attempting to rewrite history after he was caught out in a TV interview over his promise that Scotland would be in a UK state as close to federalism as possible if Scotland voted no in 2014. On Sky News today, the former Prime Minister and main speaker of the anti-independence campaign denied the promise he made almost 7 years ago, that Scotland would be in as close to a federal state as you can be, where one nation is 85% of the population. When challenged on the quote, reported in The Scotsman on the 15th of August 2014, Gordon Brown ignored this and told viewers to read the small print. In 2014, the anti-independence campaign also promised Scotland that if it voted no, it would remain part of the EU and lead the UK. Commenting, the SNP's deputy Westminster leader, Kirsten Oswald MP, said, "This is an incredible act of dishonesty by Gordon Brown. It's astounding that what's left of the anti-independence campaign are still peddling lies and backtracking every turn, even when their list of broken promises and whoppers has been laid bare for all to see." Well, Daye, this is, I guess, no surprise, but Gordon Brown certainly made that statement back in 2014, didn't he?
Absolutely, we all heard it.
So what do you think is behind this? And what is he referring to when he says the small print? I don't remember any small print in that particular statement.
No, no. It's. I understand that the Tories, where it originated from, I'm not sure. But one of the lessons that they teach their campaigners is that you must lie and confuse, and the more you lie, the more people will accept it. And I've actually seen a video where one of their mentors was teaching the audience exactly this. So, this isn't an airy-fairy accusation that I'm making. I've actually seen the video where this man is doing a workshop training the campaigners for the Tory party lies and to build on those lies.
And yet we're also, seeing this same technique being peddled by the former Prime Minister as well, who, let's face it, is not supposed to be a Tory MP, is he? He's supposed to be a Labour MP, or was.
So, yes, and I have to say, I don't associate in my brain the Labour Party of the past as liars. Um, However, they do seem to put a few pies in, although they're definitely not in the same league as the Tories. But it's a global problem, isn't it? Because Trump has adopted the same thing.
He did, yes. He made a lot of statements which were later proved to be untrue. In fact, there used to be, I believe, an entire program given over to debunking things that Mr. Trump had said. I'm
Yeah.
sure that there are plenty of people in Scotland who remember exactly what Mr. Brown said and when he said it and the circumstances in which he said it. But how on
Oh,
earth can a man of his supposed stature as the former Chancellor and the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom blatantly lie in a TV interview like that and expect people to believe him?
well, that's right. And when you look back, when you look back on how politicians have behaved, because I'm that much older, I remember when politicians of all parties did have a sense of honour, and if they were caught out doing something wrong, and it was usually something to do with sex, they actually resigned. They held their hands up and they resigned. And now we're having this assault on democracy where people are so confused, they don't know who to believe, and it's backed up by global groups of players um, confusing us all. And it's just, I don't know where it's going to end. I noticed that the EU have brought in something, and now who was it? I read about it last night on Twitter. I think it's a Swiss person
Yeah,
or something in Switzerland. Am I right?
I think you're right. I think I've also read a similar article, Dave. I
Yeah,
think you're describing the proposal that lying in political life in the European Union is to be made some kind of offence if it's proved to be, a fabrication.
yes, I think so. Yes, that's right. And it should be in our country as well. When I say our country, I'm being magnanimous and say meaning the UK. It's absolutely not on to tell lies. It's undermining democracy, that. And in my experience in Scotland, it began when a court in our own country in Scotland allowed Carmichael to get away with his nonsense.
Yeah, it's funny you
Um,
should mention that day. I was just thinking about Alistair Carmichael and the fabrication that he was caught out with involving the First Minister and I think the French ambassador. Is that correct? If I'm
absolutely,
remembering
yes,
it right?
absolutely. Although the court said something to the effect that he couldn't be trusted, but the court put the onus back on us as voters and general members of the public to use our common sense and our brains to distinguish between those who lie and those who don't, and what is the truth and what isn't the truth. Well, I think since then, times have changed and things have become so dramatic in terms of the kind of lying that is going on, that really this needs to all be rethought. And anybody caught out lying needs to be held to account, and held very much to account, and made an example of. And it doesn't help when you've got this old fashioned thing in Westminster where you're not allowed to accuse another parliamentarian in
Yes.
the House of
You're not
lying.
allowed to call anyone a liar.
Yes,
You're allowed to say that they're telling untruths, but you're not allowed to call them a liar, which I don't understand the distinction there. I was also reminded, when I read this story this evening, of the other incident which sprang to mind sort of instantly in my mind, was when Dominic Cummings took his famous drive to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight when he was full of COVID-19. Now that was a blatant lie because, I mean, he actually staged that, but he didn't seem to care. I think that was the remarkable thing about it. He sat in the
yeah,
garden of number 10 Downing Street in front of a little desk, gave a press
yeah.
conference where he spun this fairy story, and walked away confident that there would be no repercussions. I mean, that just should not happen, should it?
It shouldn't, but in the times that we live in, where we've got the press, um, which is owned by this elite that seem to be manipulating not just our UK government, but governments across the world, they're so powerful, uh, and they are following their agenda. So he would know, because let's face it, he was one of their puppets. He
Yeah.
would know that he would be able to get away with it because the press would give him a cover.
I think, I don't know about you, Dave, but I often get the impression, particularly with issues such as Brexit, that the purpose of the government's statements is more to confuse us than to inform us.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely agree with it, and that's why our own First Minister is doing so well, because people who actually have the power of critical thinking have been watching her. And I know from the young man who helps me on the farm, who has loads of English relatives, and he hears from them and how many of them are listening to her and applauding the honesty with which she shares the information and the different things that are going on with COVID. Um, and they just despair that their own prime minister is not in the same league and definitely not to be trusted.
I was thinking, when Mr. Brown was quoted as saying that we should read the small print, that his actual statement, which was that we would be living in a country which was as close to a federal state as is possible, where the population, 85% of the population is not Scottish in this case. Now that, to me, might have been the small print he was talking about, that he's put a caveat on this in order to escape scrutiny. Do you think that is a fair assessment?
I'm not quite sure I understand what you mean by
He
that.
makes a
I
comment that I'll try and find it again for you. I think what he said was he's made this comment. Oh, here it is now. I can read this back to you. He said that Scotland would be, and I'm quoting here, as close to a federal state as you can be, where one nation is 85% of the population. I think that was the caveat he was trying to insert there. Maybe that was the small print he actually meant when he made that statement, that where England basically has 85% of the population. He was basically saying they're bigger than us, and therefore, it has to go along with whatever they want.
In other words, it's meaningless.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, right. I understand what you mean now. Yes. Yes. Well, that is the whole problem, isn't it? It's an unfair political system where the majority, who, let's face it, and it's not their fault, the majority of voters are in England. Therefore, anything that England wants, England will get, even if the other three areas voted differently. England would still be the majority.
Indeed, because if all three of the smaller Celtic nations' representation was added together, they still couldn't affect
That's
anything that the English parliamentarians chose to do. So perhaps this is what Mr. Brown was referring to, but all the same, as you say, it makes his statement meaningless and worthless, I think.
Absolutely, yes. Well, in fact, it proves the point that those of us fighting for independence have been trying to make all along, that it's a political construct that is unfair.
Yeah, it's obviously been constructed that way on purpose to retain control over Scotland.
Yeah, and Wales.
And Wales and Northern Ireland too, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, we're going to move on now to Brexit now. And in Brexit news today, the UK government tells businesses to register in the EU to avoid Brexit bureaucracy. The UK government has come in for further criticism following reports that it is encouraging some UK firms to register in the European Union to avoid extra changes, paperwork and taxes resulting from its very own damaging Brexit deal. In the latest shambolic Brexit episode, advisors working for the Department for International Trade have told businesses that the best way to avoid border issues and VAT problems is by setting up a new company within the EU single market. Horizon Retail Marketing Solutions, based in Cambridgeshire, is one company that has taken up the advice, registering a European company called Horizon Europe in the Netherlands. Owner of Horizon, Andrew Moss, was reported to have said that Brexit was not about winning back control from the EU, but investing in it to survive. Daye, this is another remarkable screaming U-turn from the British government, basically saying that if you want to avoid all the problems we've created by coming out of the European Union, you have to move your business into the European Union. It seems utterly bizarre.
On the scale of bizarreness and bizarrity and what's going on with this government down in Westminster, you know, I just wonder. I was on Facebook the other day, and one of my pals asked a straightforward question, and it was, do you want a referendum in 2020 to 2022? And now, this person is a very wealthy person, but I do know that he is an independence voter. And all his wealthy friends, all predictably, no, 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 no. And there must have been about 15 no's. There wasn't too much rudeness, just the odd little bit. And then I put up yes. And then somebody else put up yes. And I think there were about 3 of us who put up yes. And we gave reasons why we would be saying yes, polite reasons. And nobody responded. They all backed away. And I thought that was very interesting.
So what did you draw from that? What were your conclusions from that experience, Daye?
Yeah, good for you asking that question. My conclusions were that they are living in a bubble and they have not a clue about what's going on. They don't want to read anything negative. Again, it comes back to critical thinking. They're voting the way they were brought up to vote. They are just not understanding anything other than from their own viewpoint, because they actually will survive no matter what. If you've got enough money yourself, you will cope and you'll get through it. But they won't be giving a single second to the plight of people who are in a very poor situation.
So basically, I think what this amounts to today is that the people who think this way are basically in denial, that they're sticking their fingers in their ears going, la, 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 I can't hear you.
Yeah, I can remember being like that when I was, maybe 12 years old, plus a wee bit. And I do remember it vividly, because my mum and I used to have some humdingers, and when I was proven wrong, that was exactly what I did. And in fact, if I was having a fight with my sister and she said to me that something was the opposite of what I wanted or thought I knew about, and I literally would do that and go la, 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 la.
Well, it's a sad day when business people are doing that sort of thing, Daye, I suppose. Anyway, let's move on to more news about Europe, and this time thousands of EU workers are at risk of missing the settlement scheme deadline. The SNP MP Stuart MacDonald has challenged the Prime Minister to automatically extend the rights of EU nationals in the United Kingdom, or at the very least to cancel the deadline for EU settlement scheme, as research reveals that thousands are set to miss the June deadline. A new report from the Joint Council for the Welfare of Immigrants shows that 1 in 3 care workers surveyed online did not know that there was a deadline to apply for settled status or know when it was. 1 in 3 care workers surveyed in person had not heard about the settlement scheme before the survey, and 1 in 7 care workers surveyed online did not know what the EU settlement scheme was. The SNP said that a huge number of people risk being criminalised overnight, and the care sector could be severely impacted if the UK government doesn't take action. Now again, this day is another remarkable instance of, it seems at least, the British government completely taking its eye off the ball and basically allowing these poor EU workers who seem predominantly to be working in the care sector to go past this due date. And effectively, at that point, they lose the right to remain in the UK and they would have to go home or face, I suppose, being fined or imprisoned.
Well, yes, it's certainly, you can point the finger at the UK government. I'd be very inclined to point my finger at the employers of the care sector. Surely they have a duty of care to their care workers to try and ensure that they know how to register, and if they wanted to keep them on, to ensure that they did register. Otherwise, we can't just put it all on the UK government.
I
I
understand what you're
really,
saying, Day. Yeah. So what you're saying really is that there are employers who ought to know about this scheme, ought to be
yeah.
telling those EU nationals to apply in plenty of time so that they can remain here and remain employed. And yet, for some reason, they don't seem to be doing that. Maybe they're distracted by the COVID restrictions and struggling to keep their businesses afloat. There must be some reason for this.
Well, yes, but again, if you supposing you've got a care home and you've got, well, I don't know how many, even a big care home, would they have as many as 30 care workers?
It depends on the
Now
size of the
that's
home,
not
I guess. Could do, yeah,
exactly. They're supposed to be like a family, aren't they, in a care home?
indeed.
I can't imagine. I've been in a couple of care homes where elderly relatives were, and the workers in there, they were all part of one big family. Now, whoever owned or ran that care home, I would have thought had a duty of care to ensure that their workers, um, were kept up to speed and would support them. And I know that our community development officer in Stirling, in my community, way back, remember when we got a whole lot of people coming over from Poland?
Yeah, yeah.
And she set to immediately try, and she contacted all of us in the communities. If you know of anybody, point them in our direction, and I'll make sure that they get packs that are written in Polish and they understand where they can get support for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So, is this mainly happening in England or is it happening in
I think
Scotland
it's
as well?
across the board, Dave. But one of the things that I wanted to raise with you, in fact, there's two things that occurred to me when we're talking about this. One is that this doesn't affect just the care industry because, as you know, rural hotels and tourist businesses all across Scotland employ thousands of European young people in various roles, and a large percentage of them, as you pointed out, are Polish. But the point is, I think that why would the government and why would the employers not want them to know this? Because it seems to me that if the British government is not making an effort to let people know about this, the only reason they could have for that would be to get rid of these Europeans and give the jobs to local people or something like that.
I can understand that argument, but at the same time, those employers also knew that had they been able to get British workers to come and work in the care sector, they wouldn't have had to employ, people coming into the country. And I don't
Yeah.
believe it was because they took lower wages. They might have taken slightly lower wages, but not significantly lower. So
Well,
the care providers knew how vital the migrant population was to keep their industry going.
Dave, I've had it said by employers, and I think it's a widely held sort of belief that particularly Polish workers have a tremendous work ethic, that they work very,
Yeah.
very hard and they do a good job of everything. And perhaps that employers just sort of desired that quality in their staff, and that is why they brought so many European staff in.
I think that was certainly true with the Polish ones, and it was my experience because there are quite a lot of dairy farms in our valley, and we still have dependency on some of the Polish workers. who have stayed on, fortunately, because I know that my next door neighbour has enormous problems trying to get people from the local community to come and work. They'll come for one day and they'll say, oh, no, I'm not doing that anymore. It's not an easy job working on a dairy farm. But the Polish guys do have an amazing work ethic. And I can remember one of them turning up at my back door asking for work. And we still have a great relationship. He's gone back to Poland since. But he helped me out an awful lot on the farm, and he helped with the garden. And I wouldn't have done without him. And he's doing really well back in Poland now. He's married. He left his cat with us, and so we built up a great relationship, and I'm sure lots of other families have as well.
Dave, we've had a number of people commenting on Twitter, particularly Gemma McLaughlin, whose post is up at the moment, saying that when we're independent, there must be a law whereby politicians caught lying should be fired and banned from political life. Would you agree with Gemma?
Yeah, well, yes, and on a nice, easy answer, yes, absolutely. I've no doubt it won't ever be as simple as that, but the principle should be that politicians need to stop.
Okay, well, thanks for that, Daye. Now we're going to move on now, and an MP is leading a call for support for small limited companies. MP Owen Thompson led a debate in the House of Commons today, calling on the UK government to provide greater parity in financial support for small limited company directors who have fallen through the gaps of available coronavirus support. The SNP MP for Midlothian, a member of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Gaps in Support, urged the Treasury to back the Directors' Income Support Scheme, which would provide financial support to company directors who have personally been adversely affected by COVID-19. Currently, in the UK, there is an estimated 2 million micro and small limited companies in the United Kingdom, collectively employing 7.5 million people. Many have been forced into debt and are struggling to stay afloat. The SNP has repeatedly called for the UK government to provide support for those who have been excluded from coronavirus support for 10 months. We've talked many times on this programme, Daye, about people who fall through the gaps of the coronavirus help schemes. This is one I have to say I hadn't considered, but I can see that there would be small companies who've maybe started up quite recently and who actually don't fulfill all the criteria and therefore getting no help whatsoever, even if their businesses are quite viable. Do you think there's some merit in what this MP is attempting to do?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the unlevel playing field aspect again, isn't it? And I mean, I went through it myself as a farmer who got no subsidy at all. We were locked out of the subsidy support scheme, as were many, many other young New Start farmers. Not that I was young, but there are young New Start farmers, and they're not on a level playing field even yet. However, going back to these people who've got small and medium-sized businesses, I don't know. So I look at my own community and I am just so impressed with the resilience that there is in the small, medium-sized businesses in our community and how they have adapted to coping and how the community has all come round about them to protect them, support them, and you're buying goods from them that you probably would never pay that amount of money for under normal circumstances, but you know that it's going to help to support that particular little business and keep it clinging on there. Sadly, I think the more a community is dispersed and becomes larger and more distant from each other, you lose that community spirit. So it's probably a great deal more difficult in a large urban area to do that.
Yeah, I think perhaps this is what this particular call is aimed at, is to try and bring those who have already fallen through the cracks in terms of being eligible for these grants, to give them something to cling to so that their businesses can restart when the lockdown ends and they finally, we all start to get back to some kind of new normal.
That's right. And we're really talking about basic survival, funds to survive for you and your family. And unless you're in a small business, and many of them are, where the rent is still enormous and their council tax is still enormous,
Yeah.
and they've got nothing coming in. And it's all going to be a knock-on effect, because I think aren't the rents of properties, do the pension funds not base the cost of these rents on how
On
much they
values.
can
Yeah,
pensions?
on values of properties, among other things. Yes.
Yeah.
Dave, I was just thinking one other thing about this particular story about people, being excluded and businesses falling through the cracks, is that most of the businesses I see who are failing at the moment, being a small business person myself, tend to be in the service sector in industrialized areas. In other words, they're providing services for other people. And
Yeah.
therefore, if other people can't afford their services, they just go to the walls. And the whole thing seems to me that COVID has proved one thing, and that is that our economy depends far too much on the internal economics of retailing and not so much on money earned from foreign exports.
Yes, yes, and how it's all integrated.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Wasn't it Napoleon who once described the British as a nation of shopkeepers?
That's true. Yeah,
Anyway,
very much.
well, speaking of shopping, they brings us to our next story. And Brexit has seen a 500% increase in credit card fees for UK buyers making EU purchases. MasterCard has announced that it will increase fees by more than 500% when UK shoppers and businesses use a debit or credit card to buy from EU-based companies. The interchange fee is capped by the European Union for member states hit by the cap, but it no longer applies to the UK following Brexit, resulting in higher costs for UK consumers. MasterCard has said it will increase the charge for online credit card payments from 0.3% to 1.5% and increase the fee for debit cards from 0.2% to 1.15%. It follows the news that UK shoppers are also being hit with huge charges for VAT, customs duties and delivery when buying from EU countries. Previously, products could move freely between the EU and the UK and EU member states. Now, the Tory Brexit rules mean that UK customers are being charged import VAT of 20%, customs duties of up to 25%, and new Brexit courier handling fees for deliveries, with Royal Mail charging £8, DHL charging 2.5% or a minimum of £11, and TNT adding £4.31 to all shipments. One customer reported having to pay £82 in extra fees to courier UPS on top of the £200 purchase price for a jacket. Commenting, the SNP Consumer Affairs spokesperson Patricia Gibson MP said, "Boris Johnson's extreme Brexit has been a disaster for the UK. With every day that goes by, we are seeing mounting costs, red tape and long-term damage to our economy. These reports show that UK consumers and businesses will be hit hard by huge charges when they make purchases, which could include everyday products, flights, hotels, car rentals and other transactions that could leave millions of people in the UK worse off." I hate to say this, Dave, but every time I read a story like this, I keep thinking of that phrase, "turkeys voting for Christmas." Surely people must have known when they voted for Brexit, this was precisely what they were going to end up with. Hello, Dave? Oh, I think we've lost the connection today. Can you hear us, Dave?
Right. Yeah, I think I got I think I got the gist of what you were saying. Can you
Yeah.
hear me?
We can hear you now, Dave. Just a
Right.
break in the transmission.
I think I got the gist of what you were saying. Basically, surely people must have been aware. I think no, people weren't aware. And it comes back again to the critical thinkers. Those of us who think critically were aware. And we tried to warn, and we were told we were scaremongering. Why was that? Why did the others believe the newspapers and the government? Because they had so much power and money behind them that they were able to bend the minds, if you like, of people who were thinking that Brexit was going to be this golden dawn of everything going to be perfect, and they believed
Yeah.
every word.
So these would be the famous sunlit uplands of Brexit that we heard about. Surely
Yeah.
the media, and I'm thinking actually primarily here about the BBC, which is largely now sort of managed and directed by Tory party donors or former politicians, that the BBC in this particular instance must have deliberately omitted these negative stories when they were
Yes.
reporting Brexit.
Absolutely. Just as the BBC failed to educate the public about the EU and the benefits that we got from the EU, they manifestly failed over 40 odd years.
Why do you think that is, Dave? Is the BBC really this sort of state broadcaster in the sense that Pravda used to be the state broadcaster for the Soviet Union? Have we got to that point yet?
I'm not sure that we have. I think the point we have got to is that some of the editors within the BBC who have the power to talk into the earphones of those giving out the news or interviewing, they have been got at. But I think in general, most people working in the BBC are genuinely honest, straightforward people who are probably very worried and upset about how, in fact, I know one of them, about what is going on in the way that the BBC is handling and delivering our news.
So you think perhaps, Dave, that not well, we've spoken about the BBC, but obviously the newspapers play a massive role in the dissemination of information about anything that involves, a big referendum. And we saw the misinformation campaign during the first independence referendum, and we also saw another campaign during the Brexit referendum, which basically seemed to be an awful lot of sound bites, but no real substance to it. There was no real investigation over what the ramifications would be.
That's right. And then when the government report was put out about what the cost of Brexit would be, or the ramifications, as you put it, they suppressed it. So, the public have been gulled into believing something in the absence of not being given any information at all on the pros or the cons of Brexit. Well, they were given the so-called pros, the rainbows and the unicorns, but they weren't given any of the cons.
Okay, well, listen, we'll need to leave this subject for the moment, Dave, and move on to our next item. And the pharmaceutical firm Moderna believes that its vaccine will work against the new COVID-19 variants. Moderna has said that it believes its COVID-19 vaccine protects against new variants found in the UK and South Africa, although it will test a new booster shot aimed at the South Africa variant after concluding that the antibody response could be diminished. The company said in a press release that it had found no reduction in the antibody response against the UK variant. Against the variant found in South Africa, it found a reduced response, but still believed that its two-dose regimen would provide protection. The emergence of new variants in the UK, South Africa and Brazil has created some concern that mutations in the virus may make the vaccines less effective. But the speed with which the Moderna was able to design a new booster shot candidate is evidence of the flexibility of the new mRNA technology upon which it is based. Moderna said that the new booster shot could be made available in future if evidence were to emerge that protection declined. Pfizer and BioNTech have also said that tests showed their vaccine is effective against the UK variant, but have not yet disclosed results against the South Africa variant. Obviously, there's a lot of medical and technical jargon involved in discussing COVID-19 variants, but I don't know about you. I remember reading up on the 1918 flu pandemic, and the new pandemic that we're in the middle of at the moment appears to be following an almost identical path with a small initial spike of cases, and then later on, a few months later, a massive second wave with mutations. Now, we know that particularly coronaviruses, and the common cold is a coronavirus, the common cold mutates rapidly, so rapidly that nobody can find a cure for it. Should we be worried, do you think, by these variants emerging, or do you believe that the pharmaceutical companies are on top of this?
I think we should be worried, but I think equally the pharmaceutical companies, as long as they see a fast buck in it, they will work their backsides off to try and find something going to ameliorate, shall we say,
Yeah.
some of the worst excesses of what the thing is. I can remember when I was at boarding school, and I would be, what, about 12 roughly? And the first pandemic I ever came across was a sickness bug.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I can't remember what it was called, but I was one of the first to get it. So I luckily ended up in the sick ward in the
Mm.
school, which was lovely. Um, it lasted for, feeling horrible for only about 3 days. Then I got better and I was released, but the whole school went down. The following 3 years, exactly the same thing happened.
Uh-huh.
And I got it mildly the next year, and then the following year I didn't get it.
So your immunity,
So
you think, had increased over the term?
I think so, and everybody's immunity did. So the sickness bug just seemed to eventually disappear, and then we've had other sick bugs in the last 10 years,
Yeah.
haven't we? What's the present sickness one called?
No
There's a
idea.
name for
I'm sorry, Dave.
it. Yeah, that's right.
What's what was the name of it, Dave? Norovirus.
Nora,
Yes,
yes.
I remember now.
And
Yeah. Mm.
whether the one I got, which would have been in the 50s, was norovirus. I don't know, but
Oh,
you know,
maybe it didn't have the
because of
name
my
for it then, Dave.
no, that's true. That's true. It
Well,
was
listen,
pretty
Day, I'd
horrible.
like to talk more about what's wrong with us all, but unfortunately, we need to move on. And this time, we're talking about EU foreign policy. Now, the EU's foreign policy chief is to fly to Moscow to condemn the Navalny arrest. It's been announced that the EU's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell, will fly to Moscow to personally deliver the bloc's condemnation of the completely unacceptable arrest of the opposition leader, Alexei Navalny. The heads of state and governments of the 27 member states will reassess the EU's relationship with Russia at a summit in March. Borrell said there was no concrete proposal from the member states as yet to the consequences of the continued detention of Navalny and the 3,000 of his supporters, but that the EU was ready to react. Poland's president, Andrzej Duda, is amongst those who have called for sanctions. He also asked for the EU official to cancel his planned visit to Moscow, but after a meeting of foreign ministers, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs said that the trip in the first week of February to meet Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov would go ahead. I don't share the opinion that when things go bad you don't talk, Borrell said. Quite the contrary, that's the moment to talk. He added, on the arrest of Navalny and the crackdown of supporters, the Council considered it completely unacceptable, condemned the mass detentions and the police brutality over the weekend, and we call on Russia for the release of Mr Navalny and those detained. Now we've seen Mr Navalny, who, as you know, was recently poisoned with Novichok, widely believed by experts in the West to have originated from Russia, to be arrested because he didn't show up effectively for a kind of parole meeting because he was in hospital having been poisoned with Novichok. It seems a ridiculous premise to arrest the man for something over which he had no control whatsoever. In fact, seems to have been instigated by Russia itself.
Yes, but we're talking about Russia, and you know, he did. If he was on parole, did he not go to another country for recovery?
He was in Germany, in Berlin. In fact, Vladimir Putin refused to actually use his name and completely, omitted his name and called him the Berlin patient.
Yes. I mean, the Russians would probably say, well, he broke his parole, he left the country. Um, you know, we can all see how he was probably better to do that and stay alive at the time. But um, I don't know. Russia just seems to be a lost cause.
It does, but it's interesting to note that Mr. Navalny's party, when they were in the elections against Mr. Putin's party, actually polled 35% of the votes. So he's not a very tiny minority party. This is a major party, and he appears to be the only real opposition to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah. Yes. Well, whether he will, people are beginning to rally around him, but the fear that they must all have will be holding that natural tide back to quite a large degree, I would think, because if you go out and you campaign on his behalf, you're a target just as he is. And when you're living in that kind of a dictatorship, democracy is just gone.
I mean, well, Mr. Navalny appears to have more lives than a cat. I mean, he's now had, I think, 3 attempts made on his life now.
Yep. They'll get him again, though.
You think they'll have another go at him? They
Oh, undoubtedly.
think he might have an accident in prison and fall downstairs or something like that.
Well, who knows? You see, I think they just don't care. It's a bit like Boris and the lying. They get away with it.
I suppose there's nobody to stop them, Day. I think that's the problem, isn't it?
And
Okay, well,
fair
talking of
play to
stop,
the EU going across there and saying, look, this isn't on. But whether it'll have any effect, I doubt.
I think the EU would need to hit Russia where it hurts in its pocket for it to have any effect, Day.
Even then, it's not going to affect them.
Okay. Well, listen, speaking of people being brought to account, the Donald Trump impeachment article is to be brought before the US Senate today. The US House of Representatives will formally charge the ex-president Donald Trump with inciting insurrection, resulting from the fiery speech to his followers before the deadly attack on the Capitol on the 6th of January, marking the start of a historic second impeachment trial. About now, the 9 House Democrats, who will serve as prosecutors, will be proceeding through the building where hundreds of Trump supporters fought with police, leaving 5 dead, and carrying the article of impeachment to the Senate where Trump will face trial. A similar ceremony was carried out for Trump's first impeachment trial last January, when the House clerk and the Sergeant-at-Arms led a small procession of lawmakers through a hushed Capitol. It will mark 2 historic firsts. Trump is the only US president to have been impeached by the House twice and will be the first to face trial after leaving office. Conviction in the Senate could result in a vote to ban him from holding future office. Leaders of the Senate, which is divided 50-50, with Democrats holding a majority because of the tie-breaking vote of the Vice President, Kamala Harris, have agreed not to start the trial until February the 9th. That gives Trump more time to prepare a defence and allows the chamber to focus on President Joe Biden's early priorities, including cabinet appointments. After a 2-month campaign to try and discredit the election defeat, Trump on January the 6th urged his followers to fight to overturn the result. A mob later descended on the Capitol, sending lawmakers into hiding for several hours, delaying Congress' formal certification of Biden's victory. 10 House Republicans joined the Democrats in voting to impeach Trump. Senate Democrats will need the support of 17 Republicans to convict him. Now, I shudder to think what's going on in America at the moment, but Donald Trump seems to be probably one of the most divisive presidents in American history. The impeachment itself, I think the best we can say of it is that the best possible outcome that they could get from it would be to prevent Mr. Trump from running for office in the future. Do you think Mr. Trump would try to run for office in the future again?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, he's not going to go away. And I think that strategy is very good. Um, Putting him in jail, they've got this tightrope to walk. If they go for him in terms of criminality, then that is going to really upset the Trump voters, who possibly will cause more disruption. But if they prevent him from running for office and maybe even prevent, yeah, I mean, it's a hard one, that.
There,
But
there
he
are,
needs,
yeah, there are rumours that even after impeachment, he might face criminal charges as well and various other things that he's alleged to have done whilst in office. But it's not clear whether any of that will actually happen now.
uh-huh, yeah. Yeah, but he
Anyway,
deserves it.
we shall leave Donald Trump for the moment. And in other news today, financial support is to be provided for the wedding sector. A £25 million fund to support the wedding sector and its supply chain will open to applications this week. In recognition of the ongoing challenges faced by the sector, a further £10 million has been added to the £15 million announced in December. Launching on Thursday, the 28th of January, the fund will provide one-off grants of up to £25,000 for eligible businesses in the sector impacted by the coronavirus pandemic, including wedding venues, photographers, caterers and suppliers. The fund will be managed regionally by Scotland's three enterprise agencies: South of Scotland Enterprise, Scottish Enterprise, pardon me, and Highlands and Islands Enterprise. This, again, is a story of the Scottish Government doing its day job, isn't it? Another group of companies and small businesses which are set to benefit from some government help.
Yes, yes, and quietly in the background, they are providing funding for all sorts of small groups and businesses, and I know that the Scottish Enterprise Rural Leadership Group were given funding to give to rural leaders to support individuals within their various postal codes to try and help them to build their businesses. So it's not widely reported, but this funding is trickling out from the Scottish Government,
Yeah, I think
and it's
I was.
targeted at businesses.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Day, that this programme has reported repeated stories, actually, maybe half a dozen stories like this, of the Scottish Government finding money, several millions of pounds usually, for businesses which have not been included in the coronavirus measures. Do you
Yeah.
think maybe there's a limit, though, to how much the Scottish Government can do? Because, I mean, the purse strings are held mostly in Westminster.
Well, yes, of course, there's a limit, but I think that is why they're targeting specifically potential growth, innovative businesses, and it's businesses that have been hit by the coronavirus um, downsides, um, and businesses that would otherwise have been growing exponentially.
And of course,
So
yeah, I was going to say the wedding sector, Day, is one of those sectors where you would have hoped at least that it was kind of future proof, but nobody really expected the pandemic to do this to business. I mean, personally, there is a large wedding venue in the town where I live, which was recently converted from an old sandstone building, and it's beautiful. It's cost a fortune to do it. And now it's lying idle, and with weddings costing anywhere from £5,000 to £50,000, it's big business, isn't it?
Absolutely. In my own village, we got funding from the EU to renovate and extend our village hall, and it's a tremendously popular wedding venue. So that has been affected as well. Um, and then there are loads of farms and tourism businesses who would have wedding venues. Lots of big estates have them. They're not all held in the big hotels like you see in the middle of Glasgow and Edinburgh. They're held all over the place, even in tents, in a farmsteading.
Hmm.
So it's interesting how this money can, if it's targeted correctly, then it can help to sustain these businesses.
Today it's been said that, well, certainly by one commentator that I read, that the pandemic has proved one thing, that if you want to disable the global sort of economy, all you have to do is introduce a pandemic, and all of the internal economies contract and collapse eventually, because basically most of us make our money from selling services and things to each other. Do you think there's a case here for government planners to start thinking more realistically now about what to do if there's another pandemic?
Well, from what I've heard, which isn't a huge amount, but I have heard scientists warning us that there's going to be more pandemics in the future. I'm not sure what the scientific basis of that is, But if it's the case, then the implications are that this pandemic is just the start of many more to come. So yes, I would say it's imperative for perhaps for economies to contract globally. And I do know a very good friend of mine who was quite high powered up in business. She was at a big conference in Geneva where a lot of the global leaders of the various companies were. And one woman from a big company stood up and she said, "We're going to go through a stage where we compare ourselves to a snail, which spends all its life growing its shell
Yeah.
until its shell becomes so big that it can't move anymore. And then it has to start getting rid of that shell layer by layer by layer until it can become more flexible."
So you think there's a lesson to be learned in that parable then?
I think so. Well, she certainly did.
Okay.
And I'm
Well,
talking about 7 years ago.
well, it sounds to me like an excellent parable, Dame. Anyway, we're just about running out of time, but before we finish the programme tonight, I am going to have a go at mangling some Burns poetry for you, since it is Burns night tonight. And I thought of the most appropriate poem, considering we've been talking about the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, and people telling lies, that such a parcel of rogues of the nation would probably be the most appropriate poem for me to read. So here it is, and I will do the best I can. Farewell to our Scottish fame, farewell our ancient glory, farewell e'en to the Scottish name, sae famed in Marshall's story. Now Sark runs out of the Solway sands, and Tweed runs to the ocean, to mark where England's province stands, such a parcel of rogues in a nation. What force or guile could not subdue, through many warlike ages, is wrought now by a coward few for hireling traitors' wages. The English steel we could disdain, secure in valour's station, but English gold has been our bane, such a parcel of rogues in a nation. O would or I had seen the day that treason thus could sell us. My old grey head had lain in clay with Bruce and loyal Wallace. With pith and power till my last hour, I'll make this declaration: we're bought and sold for English gold, such a parcel of rogues in a nation. Well, there you go. My first and probably only ever reading of Robert Burns to finish tonight's programme. Anyway, just before we leave you, is of course time for me to tell you that we're in the middle of a massive fundraising event for Broadcasting Scotland.
Yes.
Dave, have you got some
Okay.
Burns? I've just been told that you want to read something too.
Yes, I have.
Oh, come on.
I've got the old farmer's salutation.
Let's go for it.
Sing the solemn in me seek, and raise a philosophical reek, and physically causes seek in clime and season. But tell me whiskey's name in Greek, I'll tell you the reason. Scotland, my old respected mother, though whiles ye moistify your leather, till where ye sit on craps o' heather, ye time your dam. Freedom and whiskey gang together. Tack off your dram.
To Rabbie Burns.
To Rabbie Burns.
Thank you, Dave. That was excellent. Well, if you've hopefully had enough of my terrible Burns, I will just make the announcement about our crowdfunder. Now, of course, Broadcasting Scotland wants to be here through the rest of this year at every one of the major events of this year. And of course, we have an election followed by a referendum, we hope, so there will be plenty for us to cover. So if you'd like to see more programmes made by Broadcasting Scotland, and better programmes and more variety, then you can help us by becoming a supporter. Follow the instructions on your screen now and go to our website and follow broadcastingscotland.scot/register to become a supporter, or you can make an individual donation, and of course we always need volunteers. That is about all we've got time for this evening from Scotland at 7, so it just remains for me to thank Daye Tucker for being my guest this evening, and we'll see you all again on the next Scotland at 7. A very good evening to you.
the Catalans, the Basques, the Galicians in the Basque.
An independent future for Scotland.
How quickly do you think a referendum can be arranged?
Best practice demands that it should be 6 months.
Just looking at the overall share numbers for Scotland at the moment, the SNP 46.4%.